Opioids continues to also be a significant problem in the black community, killing black folks at an alarming rate. According to researchers, opioid-related deaths in the black community have nearly tripled as their white counterparts are beginning to see a decline in fatalities. According to the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, in 2015, opioid overdoses accounted for 6.6 out of every 100,000 deaths of African Americans. In 2019, it's now 17.1. Now, that's a huge jump. While overdose deaths among whites took place at more than twice the rate as blacks as recently as 2015, currently the rates have closed. As of 2019, opioid-related deaths accounted for 19.1 deaths per 100,000 in the black community. Overall, nearly 5,000 more black people died of an opioid overdose in 2019 than they did in 2015. This continues to be a significant issue. And keep in mind, when we talk about opioids, originally doctors were not prescribing African Americans opioids because they feared black folks were trying to get high. That's why I said racism actually helped black folks in that case. But we continue to see the opioid crisis and how it is taking the lives of more and more African Americans every single day. Adrienne Alexander Allen is the author of My Parents Have a Drug Problem, and we'll be talking to her in just a second. I do want to bring in also my panel today, A. Scott Bolden, former chair of the National Bar Association Political Action Committee. Amisha Cross is Democratic strategist, political commentator, and also Reverend Jeff Carr, founder of the Affinity Fellowship here in Nashville. Last name might be familiar, y'all. Every Thursday, you see his brother, Dr. Greg Carr, here on Roland Unfiltered. And so, Jeff, glad to have you on the show. We're going to go to the author in just a second, but let's talk about a combination of the death of Michael K. Williams, but also these opioid deaths. This is a significant issue, Amisha. And when you talk about, again, how you address it, initially, as I said, white folks are being prescribed opioids at a much higher rate than African Americans. Doctors were saying, white doctors were saying, oh no, black people are trying to get high. Now all of a sudden we're seeing the impact. Not only that, once people are on these opioids, now you have drugs that are laced with fentanyl, which is 100 times more potent than these opioids. And so we are seeing a significant problem. It was a major issue in the 2016 presidential campaign when all of a sudden white folks were saying, let's not throw our folks in jail, let's treat them a far cry when crack cocaine ravaged black communities in the 1980s and 90s.
You're absolutely right there, Roland. At the end of the day, we have seen such a varied response, such a disparate response when it comes to white America, particularly as it relates to opioids, because opioids were seen as the drug of white people, whereas crack cocaine was seen as the drug of black people. And we know that there are literally thousands of people that are still locked up based on addiction around crack. Meanwhile, the immediate response from the government, from a lot of those who are in power at various levels and private sector organizations, was that now we need to find treatment. We need to find prevention mechanisms. We need to make sure that we address the opioid crisis differently. And in large part, the only difference between the two of those crises was the color of the majority of people who were being affected. I think that when we talk about opioids, we also have to talk about the lead-in and how America got to where it is based on the fact that pharmaceutical companies in the 80s and 90s were basically giving out opioids as painkillers like candy to people and not really acknowledging the fact that long-term consequences of addiction were extremely known even by the pharmaceutical companies then, but they just ignored it. And many doctors knew it as well. So as you know, and as your audience probably knows, during the Derek Chauvin trial, we heard about George Floyd's issues with addictive properties related to opioids because of a previous medication he had for a back injury. What we recognize is that once individuals are off of those medications, they will find something to help them to get that same type of pain cure-all. And typically that is a street-level opioid drug. I think that we're seeing these levels increase in the African-American community because first and foremost, those drugs have become more easily accessible. But in addition to that, the tracking mechanisms around them are not as strong as the tracking mechanisms for, say, crack cocaine. What we've seen is that there has not been a heightened level of penalty or tracking of the actual drug dealers in a way that we've seen for certain other drugs. And it's devastating because the national conversation leaves black people out of the opioid crisis, even though we know by the numbers and the statistics you spoke of at the top of your question that it matters to the black community as well, and those numbers are only increasing. And I wish we pay more attention and put a spotlight on it, not just when a celebrity dies from an opioid addiction, but also when our neighbors, our brothers, brothers, our sisters, our cousins, people that we know personally and have a personal connection to are battling these crises every day.
Jeff, this is important because, again, you can see the difference in the attitude here. And when I say that, you've had white folks now at these town halls who now all of a sudden have lots of compassion for people who are having drug issues who have issues with opioids. Many of them white. Same white folks did not have a lot of compassion for us. But now when we're seeing opioids exploding, now the question is, what does the black community do? How do we now target with education and the impact? Because again, this is not just affecting low to moderate income. This is affecting upper income folks as well who are losing their lives due to opioids.
Sure, Roland. And again, man, it's great to be on. It's great to be on a great show with my brother. I hadn't seen you since the old days of the Round Table on NPR. So it's good to be on. Good to see you behind that Edward Havell painting of the Fifth Jubilee singers that centered Nashville as Music City. Not country music, but that music that was the soulful music of the Jubilee singers. To follow up what Amisha was saying, it's about priority. And one of the first things we have to do is we have to destigmatize what drug use is. Drug use is not something that is simply limited to a person because of race or socioeconomic status. Drug use can become very easily, especially when we're talking about addiction, disease. I call it dis-ease because it's a space where there is not an ease in the spirit. As a longtime minister, as an inner spiritual minister, some of the work that I do involves intervention. And it also involves transporting young people in particular to safe spaces. I would never break that ministerial curtain and expose any of the people that I've worked with from around the country. But I will say this, opioid abuse has been a huge problem, particularly in the white community for a long time. They didn't treat it as if it was a stigma, as if someone was a crackhead or a pillhead. They treat it like a disease. I have been inside homes where a child has a room that is bigger in square footage than my house in a private jet. I have assisted in getting them to an intervention space where they can go and dry out for 30 days. Some of these spaces are hidden in mountains. Some of these spaces are in farms across the United States. And guess what? Some of them are $30,000 a month. Some of them are $30,000 a week. Celebrities, famous people from all over the world come to get treatment for dis-ease. We can be very easy. We can quickly start to stigmatize this, and that's why it becomes hidden. We put this energy underground because we start calling people crackheads. We start calling people addicts. And we start saying, hey, don't let your cousin in the house because, you know, they're going to steal everything you got. Because of that, there is a stigma attached to it. The reality is addiction is a disease, and it could very easily happen to any one of us. We can go to the dentist and be prescribed hydrocodone. We can take one more pill than we absolutely need, and before long, we can be in the street. The weed that many people are smoking in this day and age, they're hybrid strains of marijuana that contain up to 40% more THC than the weed that many of us were around in the 80s and 90s. So this is why we're starting to see this equalize in our community. And what we have to do is find ways to address the root causes of addiction and stop looking at it as if it is a stigma. White people have seen this for a long time, and that's why they created treatment. We have to be in a position to do the same.
So, Scott, look, we talk about information coming to our community, the targeting, if you will, a campaign, an initiative. I mean, that's really going to have to be at play here to now deal. I mean, those opioid numbers are staggering to go from 6.6 to 17.1 per 100,000 in just 4 years.
Yeah, I agree with you, and they're keeping those numbers, and it's the numbers of African Americans who those numbers are going up. Let's be real honest. Drugs have always been part of America. There's a supply and demand, and black people and white people are part of that demand. But black people have always been overcounted and white people undercounted when it comes to the drug demand and the drug jurisdictions. I'm a former prosecutor from New York. I can tell you the courts are filled with black people and brown people. They weren't filled with white people. There's more white people in America than black people, and more white people do drugs than black people. It's just proportional. It's got to be. It's a very practical application. Not saying there's anything wrong, but I will tell you this, Roland. I was with Marion Barry when he got out of jail for smoking weed, right? And I remember he was running for mayor, and he went to the white part of Ward 3, and they really gave him a hard time. I mean, they called him a crackhead, and the media connotes crack with crime, which is why it was treated like a crime. And then obviously now the opioid crisis with white America, now we've taught them that it's a health issue conveniently for them. But I remember Marion Barry's response was that my problems with alcohol and drugs have to do is under the public spotlight. Your problem with alcohol and drugs and your family's problems with alcohol and drugs, it's just not on the public spotlight. You're no different than me. You have someone in your family or you are addicted to drugs or alcohol. So don't judge me, if you will. And I got to tell you, he overcame that crowd of people that didn't look like him because he spoke from the heart. It is a national, it is an American problem. And so this isn't Democrat or Republican. It's got to be all of us in America. You reduce the demand, you put drug dealers out of business, the ones who are middlemen and the ones who are higher up. We just can't get rid of the demand.
I want to go pull in my guest, author Adrienne Alexander Allen. Adrienne, glad to have you on the show. So obviously these are significant numbers. So the question now is, what is going to be the campaign to begin to teach and educate people about the dangers of opioids? How are we going to reach African Americans on this issue?
Roland, first and foremost, thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to be here. It all speaks to education, as we said. But one of the main issues with education is that we aren't educating the masses. When it comes to dealing with addiction, opioid use, abuse, and all types of drugs, we are dealing with the addict first and not the family. We know that families are affected. We know that children are affected. So we need to do mass education when it comes to teaching people about the effects of opioid addiction. When it comes to these things, people act as if it doesn't matter, it doesn't happen. As you mentioned, you know, they created this opioid epidemic in 2017 when in the 80s and 90s, like you said, we weren't getting that same attention with crack and everything, heroin that was affecting our communities. And, you know, we see the characters that Michael K. Williams and others on The Wire play. Those are real life individuals that each and every one of us have come in contact with. And so we need to start educating more about the effects and the youth that are affected by drugs, because this also, we are missing a whole demographic of people. We aren't talking to the children who are growing up in these homes with addicted parents and addicted family members. We're talking to the addict, but we're not telling the children, listen, I know this is your life. This is what you were born into, but you need to learn that this does not have to be your reality going forward. And if we start touching these children, because as we see, each generation has become more enamored with drug use and making drugs popular. And so we need to teach them that when you die from drug use or drug abuse, you can't come back. You see your friends pass away, like that should be a learning and a teachable moment for you to understand that drug use is real and that you need to be better educated on the effects of drug use. This fentanyl that we're seeing now, when you see it, fentanyl, is lethal in small doses. You touch it and you can die, you can overdose. You don't even have to ingest it. So we have to use more education when it comes to drugs and drug use.
One of the issues that you also have to deal with is the racism that was initially in all of this, where you have white doctors who are not prescribing African Americans opioids. But we also, though, have to have a real federal drug policy that is not one focusing on criminalization, but there's one that's focusing on treatment.
Yeah. Yeah.
I think that for us, for me
Adrienne?
Personally,
Yeah, go ahead.
Growing up in Baltimore, you know, we saw the methadone clinics. We saw, you know, quote unquote junkies. We saw them using a drug to counter the effects of other drug use. And so when you use methadone, I've seen so many stories of children who died from overdosing from methadone, which was supposed to have been a treatment. And so we have to find other ways, and it needs to be a full body treatment, right? Like it has to be emotional, mental, physical. It needs to be every aspect taken into consideration when it comes to treatment options for these people.
So now, again, when we look at one of these reports, and we saw so much attention that was being focused on the Republican presidential candidates. Trump talked about how he was going to fix the problem. You had Chris Christie talking about this thing as well. So Adrienne, now the question is, are we going to see more public officials talking about this, providing the funding needed to ensure that we're creating the kind of public service campaigns targeting African Americans, again, Black-specific programs that we understand to reach our people on this very critical issue?
It's funny that you say that because we hear so much about Hunter Biden, right? It's like they have made such a big deal about Hunter, but not about DJ Jr., DT Jr., excuse me. So I feel like they know that the programming is needed. We know that they know that the money and the funding is needed for African-American people, but will they do it? I feel like they just aren't there yet. I feel like it's going to be us as a community to figure out those ways to get these grants, to get these funds, and to start these programs. Because if we leave it up to them, I honestly don't see it happening.
All right, then. Look, we certainly appreciate you joining us again, folks. The book is called My Parents Have a Drug Problem. The author, Adrienne Alexander Allen. Thanks a lot. Folks, back to our Roland Martin Unfiltered video in just one moment. All right, folks, Seek.com is a Black-owned company founded by Mary Spio. It's a virtual reality company where you can actually go there, look at their virtual reality content. A couple of devices they actually have for sale that you might be interested in. First off, their VR headset allows for you to slide your phone right in and experience that virtual reality content on their site or watch a 360-degree video. Also, there are 360-degree headphones, tremendous bass, used for gaming, Bluetooth, phone calls, you name it. Folks, you can get these two at Seek.com using this promo code RMVIP21, RMVIP21. You buy one or the other, or even both, a portion of the proceeds come back to us here at Roland Martin Unfiltered. And so we want you to check out Seek.com and give it a try.